So typically when I would do an interview, I would always make sure someone is sitting right here off camera, and I would have a conversation with them about, my latest book and things like that. But I think video is changing so much that you can kind of do what you want to do, and it's pretty well accepted, especially in a world of vlogging. So I'm just going to tell you straight up how I created the character Brian Oz Bailey and the inspiration for Alabama Irish, and I think you'll find it interesting. When I was 19 years old, I was at a small college called Northeast State. It's where I was going to college before I went to Auburn, and I was on a theater scholarship, and I was involved in chorus. And we joined a bunch of colleges from across the United States, and we all sang Gabriel Fauré's Requiem in Carnegie Hall in New York City. And I believe the year was the year 2000, I think. And we were staying at a hotel in Manhattan, and after dinner at the Harbor Rock Cafe, we came outside, and as the group was discussing what we were going to do that night, because I know that we were planning on going up to the Empire State Building to check out that view. None of us had ever been to Manhattan before. And when we were standing out on the sidewalk talking, there was this very attractive blonde-haired, brown-eyed girl, and she was walking our way, and when our eyes met, she actually darted her eyes because she didn't want me to know that I caught her looking at me. But she was so pretty, and and her group was coming right by us, and when she got up really close to us, I just kind of gave a little silly wave, and she laughed, which was good because I'm not a very funny guy, and I don't tell funny jokes or anything. Me and some of my friends make the joke that I have to find the jokes that work and use them over and over and over again, the ones that work, because I'm not a naturally funny person. So, but how many millions of people are in New York City? And that night at the hotel, we came downstairs to go to the Empire State Building, and she was in that hotel, and she was in the lobby, and her sister was singing in Carnegie Hall with a bunch of high schools from Nebraska. And she was from Nebraska. Her name was Shanna, and she saw me before I saw her, and I just kind of waved her over, and I met her in the middle of the lobby, and they were going to Broadway she and her mom and her sister and all their friends were going to Broadway to watch some plays while we were going to the Empire State Building. And we just hit it off, and I asked her if she wanted to hang out with me after she got back from Broadway and I got back from the Empire State Building, and she said yeah. So we ended up meeting in the lobby, I think around 10 o'clock at night, and we went for a walk, just the two of us in Manhattan. She had just graduated college in theater from a school in either Illinois or Indiana, I can't remember, and she was moving to New York to be an actress. That was her goal. And I was a freshman in college, but I was so fascinated by her and so intrigued, and I thought she was so lovely. And it was the first time, I think, that I had genuinely fallen for someone. And it wasn't like, when you're in middle school or high school and you have these crushes. It wasn't like that. Like, I was really attracted to her, and I really liked her. And so we hung out, and then the next day was the Carnegie Hall performance. After our group performed Gabriel Fauré's Requiem, which is a very beautiful Latin piece, I went and I sat beside her and her mom while they watched her sister perform, and I was there and I was watching the performance with them. And after that was over, her group from Nebraska and then our group, everybody had signed up through the same company, and I didn't know that. And they put us on a boat, and there was music and really good food and dancing. There was a dance floor on the boat, and it was going to go to the Statue of Liberty and back. And so when we started approaching the Statue of Liberty, Shanna and I went out on the deck, and I just remember like me putting my coat on her and her leaning against me to stay warm. And we saw the city from the water, and we saw the stars, and we saw the Statue of Liberty. It was looking back at, when I was 19 and I hadn't lived that much, I hadn't had that much life experience, but looking back, like, that was a really incredible experience to share that with somebody. I grew up on a dirt road in Alabama, a town of less than 1,000 people, and to be singing in Carnegie Hall and to meet a lovely girl like Shanna, and to have a weekend like that with her was really incredible. we stayed in touch for years, and we still stay in touch. She lives in Colorado, and she's married with kids, and I'm dating a girl now in Atlanta, Georgia, and it's going really well. And so, you go your separate ways, but you stay friends. That was really wonderful. And I knew that after I wrote The Mason Jar, I knew that I wanted to tell a story that Shanna had inspired. And that is what inspired the love story element of Alabama Irish. And the way I came up with Brian Bailey's character is when I was at Auburn, there was a girl who would always hang out at the local coffee shop, and that's where I went to study. I hated studying in the library. Well, she told us where she was from, but as we got to know her, we realized we weren't really sure we could believe anything the girl told us. Like, we weren't really even sure that was her real name. She was like 20 or 21 years old, and she had been driving on the Georgia and Alabama countryside, and if I remember right, she was on her way to Florida. And the story was, this is a story she told us, her car had broke down at Auburn. She was renting a bedroom from a group of people who lived in Opelika and Auburn and was working in the area. She was renting a bedroom from them, and she was saving her money to repair her car, and then she would just move on. But here was the thing. She spoke with an Irish accent, but she had never been to Ireland, and she wasn't Irish, but she was so in love with the Irish culture that she had learned the Irish accent and spoke it. And I always found that to be so interesting because, all I had known was small rural area Alabama. Then I was going out into the world and meeting these interesting people. But I never forgot her. And I knew, so I had this idea. I was like, what if I created a character at Pepperdine to go along with the trilogy that I was writing, and he walked around speaking with an Irish accent. But I didn't want it to be where he was so in love with the culture that he faked it. Like, I wanted it to be funny, but I wanted it to be believable, and I wanted the audience to sympathize with him, empathize with him, and be compassionate toward him. I had to write a hero character. So one of my friends, Brian Harrison, he had traveled around the world just like I had. We had met through some mutual friends. We both had a very similar worldview. We got along really well every time we hung out. And he was teaching English in China. And this would have been about the year 2000, probably around the year 2011, 2012, so about 6 years ago. And I wrote him a message on Facebook, and I said, hey, when are you going to be back in Birmingham? Because his family was from Birmingham, Alabama. And he said, well, I'll be back during Christmas. And I said, well, and Brian's really good with comedy. Brian, he's the kind of guy that can tell you a story about tying his shoelaces and have you rolling in the floor in laughter. Like, he can crack you up. He understands comedy from a strategic approach, not just, he's just this real funny, jolly guy. Like, he understands how to write it and how to tell a funny story. We met at a Irish pub, and that was just ironic, actually. The pub was just really close to where he lived, but we met at an Irish pub, and we started kicking around ideas, and I was literally writing notes on a bar napkin with a pen. And I said, and I told him about this girl that I knew at Auburn that walked around and spoke with the Irish accent. And he had been to Ireland. Brian Harrison had been to Ireland and had been to the Guinness Beer Factory. And I knew from Pepperdine during my graduate school years there that Oz Guinness, who owns Guinness Beer, loves Pepperdine. And I met him there at a lectureship. And I got to shake his hand and have a conversation with him. And I knew that the Guinness Beer Company creates scholarships for Irish students. They award a lot of scholarships. So Brian Harrison and I were kicking all these ideas back and forth. And Brian Harrison's idea was that Brian Oz would somehow get tied in with Ireland itself and the Irish Republican Army. But we just kept shooting the ideas back and forth until at the end of the meeting, his name was going to be Brian Oz Bailey. Bailey because my mom's maiden name is Bailey, and it's a very English-Irish name. Oz came from Oz Guinness, and then Brian Oz Bailey, the name Brian, came from Brian Harrison. I wanted to name him to show Brian Harrison honor. But we came up with the idea that Brian Oz would find out that there was this Guinness scholarship to Pepperdine, and the girl, Shanna, who I named Shannon in the story, she would be in school at Pepperdine at that time, We hadn't even come up with the idea of him being an MMA fighter and then being in Manhattan for an exhibition. We hadn't come up with that yet. But that he would meet Shannon in Manhattan and she would inspire him. And we created him to fake that he was from Ireland so that he could apply for the Guinness Scholarship, because the scholarship, we created this scholarship in our minds that anybody from Ireland that wanted to study theology could go to Pepperdine on a full ride scholarship. I turned Brian Oz to come from a very broken family to where he's not expected to do much. He doesn't have a lot of goals and aspirations, but there's a man in the community that takes Brian under his wing, and that man owns a MMA dojo, mixed martial arts dojo, and Brian Oz would get involved in that and become a trainer. And they would go to Manhattan for an exhibition tournament, and that's where Brian Oz would meet Shannon, and she would be either a musician or an actress at Pepperdine. And when Brian Oz returns back to Alabama, he starts thinking about how he can be the kind of guy that would be worthy of Shannon's love and admiration. And yeah, he decides to lie, which is a bad move. But what you find out throughout the novel is when he goes to Pepperdine and gets hooked up with Clayton Fincannon and Ryan Lockwood, who become his roommates, they start having a huge positive influence on his life. Shannon has an influence on his life, and we see his character arc from becoming a guy that feels like he needs to lie because he's ashamed of where he came from, to a guy who ends up embracing who he is and comes very clean with his family and friends about who he is, what he's done, and where he's going to go. Alabama Irish is very much an epic romance, so I know that based on the analytics, women over 25 really enjoy the story, but it is the kind of story that a man can enjoy as well. My dad's actually really into agriculture. He has cows and chickens, and he runs around in a circle where everybody shares those interests. And one of his buddies who read Alabama Irish told my dad that it was the best book he'd ever read, so that was pretty encouraging.